A crystal glass touched oak and the room obeyed. "Laugh again," the mafia boss said softly. "See what it costs you." She walks out untouched. Everyone else earns what they came for. Her name was Elena Marini. 24, waitress apron, sensible shoes, and the kind of steady hands that had no business trembling over a room full of armed men. In 2 minutes, she would kneel beside a bleeding busboy instead of begging for herself. In 2 hours, she would be locked behind the doors of Dante Salvator's private house, wearing his dead sister's old sweater and wondering why the most feared man in New York kept looking at her like she had reached into his chest and closed her hand around something broken. The secret she hid was simple enough to sound harmless. She had spent years teaching herself how to keep people from dying. The secret he hid was worse. The last girl who moved toward blood instead of away from it had died on a restaurant floor while men like him stood still. And when Dante Salvator set down his glass, he did not save her life. He changed the price of it. I had learned in restaurants that men with money and men with guns often sounded the same when they laughed. That night the private room at Belladonna smelled of cigar smoke, red wine, and the sharp citrus polish we used on the old walnut table. I was balancing a tray of crystal tumblers when somebody shoved a chair back too hard. Glass clipped glass. A busboy named Matteo startled beside me. Then one of the men at the table caught him by the wrist for moving too slowly. It happened fast after that. A curse in Italian. A flinch. A crystal tumbler striking the edge of the table and shattering on the floor. Matteo cried out and dropped to one knee, blood running bright from a deep cut across his wrist. Every man in the room looked at the head of the table, not at the blood, at him. Dante Salvator sat at the far end under the low amber chandelier, one hand around a glass of whiskey. He wore black the way priests wore black, without decoration, as if the color belonged to him. Nobody else moved. Nobody even breathed properly. Matteo made a wet, shocked sound. I put the tray down. "Don't," my manager hissed at me under his breath. "Elena." But the blood was already on the marble. My body moved before fear caught up. I dropped to my knees in the broken crystal, tore the hem of my apron and wrapped it around Matteo's wrist. "Hold this," I told him, pressing his shaking hand tighter to the wound. "No, harder." "Look at me harder." He stared at me pale. "Good," I said, "stay with me." Only then did I feel it, that silence, the kind that had weight. I looked up. Every man at that table was staring at me now. One of them laughed. "She's just a waitress." Another leaned back with a grin meant to be charming and failed by several miles. Pretty one, too. Shame she saw more than she should have tonight. I did not know what I had seen. Men in suits, thick watches, an envelope slid across linen, faces I would have forgotten on purpose if given the chance. But I knew threat when it entered a room. It changed the temperature. The grinning man crooked a finger at me. "Come here." I stayed where I was, one hand on Matteo's shoulder, the other pressing the makeshift bandage. My palms were slick. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, but I did not stand. Then came the sound, a soft, precise click. Dante Salvator set down his glass and the signet ring on his right hand kissed crystal once. No one laughed after that. He looked first at Matteo's wrist, then at the blood on my apron, then at me. His eyes were dark enough to make you think of deep water and the things buried under it. "Let go of the boy," the man with the grin said to me. "You heard me." Dante did not raise his voice. "If you speak to her again," he said, "you'll do it through broken teeth." The room shifted, not loudly, just enough for every spine to straighten. The grinning man gave a brittle smile. "Over a waitress." Dante's gaze stayed on me. "Over anyone, I say." She heard names. She heard you act like an idiot in a borrowed suit. A couple of men looked down at the table. That was when I understood something simple and terrible. The most dangerous man in the room was not the one speaking the most. It was the one everyone else obeyed around. The grinning man's face tightened. You'd make an issue of this. Dante leaned back by half an inch. I already did. Then he turned to one of the men behind him. Doctor, a woman I hadn't noticed stepped forward from the wall, all severe cheekbones and dark hair pinned at the nape. She crouched beside me, assessed Mateo's arm in one glance, and nodded once as if I had passed something. Good pressure, she said. My breath shook on the way out. The grinning man still looked unconvinced. She's just... Dante's voice cut through his. She's the only one leaving here unharmed. No one challenged him after that. The doctor took over and I sat back on my heels, suddenly aware of the sting in my knees where Crystal had bitten through my stockings. Dante noticed that too. His gaze dropped once to the thin line of blood on my skin. Something unreadable moved through his face and vanished. Name, he said. Alina, he waited. Alina Marini. Something flickered in his eyes at my last name. So brief I could have imagined it. He stood. Everyone else in the room stood with him. It should have made him look theatrical. It didn't. It made everyone else look temporary. Come with me, Alina Marini. I pushed to my feet. I have a shift. That got one startled sound out of somebody near the wall. Dante almost smiled. Almost? No, he said. You had a shift. I looked at my manager. He was staring very hard at the tablecloth as if thread count had suddenly become a moral issue. I need to call my brother. You will. I'm not going anywhere with a stranger. That nearly smile disappeared. He stepped closer, and I understood why stillness could feel more threatening than motion. He stopped far enough away not to touch me. Close enough that I could smell him. Cedar, clean soap, and cold night air brought inside on wool. You're coming with me, he said, because a room full of stupid men now knows your face. My throat went dry. And I'm safer with you. A long pause. No, he said finally. You're safer where I can see you. I should have run. I knew that. Every lesson of my life had pressed itself into that one moment and screamed. Instead, I looked at Mateo being let out alive. I looked at the broken glass. I looked at the man who had stopped a room by setting down a drink. And for the first time in years, a door I had spent my whole life keeping shut opened anyway. I went with him. Dante did not take me to a warehouse or a dungeon or any of the ugly places fear had already built in my head. He took me to a townhouse in the West Village with black iron railings, warm lights in the windows, and two armed men standing so still on the front steps they might have been part of the stonework. Inside, the floors were pale marble, the ceilings high, and the silence expensive. I hated that it was beautiful. I hated more that my first clear thought was that my shoes were leaving scuffs on the entry rug. A woman in her 50s came from the back hall carrying a folded sweater and a look sharp enough to trim wire. Don't drip on the runner, she told me. I blinked. She thrust the sweater into my hands. Bathroom, left then right, hot water works. If you faint, do it on tile. Maria, said a dry male voice from behind me. You continue to romance strangers in a way that alarms the rest of us. The speaker appeared carrying 2 garment bags and a paper bag that smelled intensely of coffee. He was pretty in a narrow, exhausted way, with good cheekbones, rolled sleeves, and the expression of a man one inconvenience away from writing his will. This, he said to me, is what happens when I try to lose 8 pounds in an Italian household. Violence, psychological warfare, butter where butter has no moral right to be. Maria crossed herself. He lies as easily as he breathes. I breathe with discipline, he said, unlike your focaccia. For one disorienting second, I almost laughed. Dante, removing his coat, said, Tommaso. Tommaso straightened at once. Right, yes, serious, terrible evening, my apologies. He lowered his voice to me. Still, if she offers you lemon cake, take it. She only weaponizes bread against people she loves. Maria sniffed and disappeared toward the kitchen. That left me in the entry hall with Dante and the kind of panic that arrived late and all at once. I'm calling my brother now, I said. Dante nodded toward a side table. Phone. The fact that he agreed unsettled me more than refusal would have. My fingers shook as I dialed Nico. He answered on the third ring, half asleep and instantly annoyed. Elena. It's after midnight. I know, listen to me. I turned slightly away from the room, though I could still feel Dante there. Don't leave the apartment tonight. That's a dramatic opener. Nico, something in my voice must have reached him. What happened? Nothing you can fix. Lock the door. If anyone asks where I am tomorrow, say I'm with a cousin in Queens. We don't have cousins in Queens. We do tonight. Silence. Then softer, are you in trouble? I looked at Dante. He was unbuttoning his cuffs with the calm of a man coming home from opera, not threats. Yes, I said, but I'm breathing. Nico exhaled hard. Text me in an hour. I will. When I hung up, Dante held out a glass of water, not close enough to brush my fingers, just there. Bathroom, he said. Then food. I'm not hungry. That wasn't a question. I took the water because I suddenly needed something cold and ordinary in my hand. The bathroom was larger than my bedroom at home. I locked the door, then leaned over the sink and stared at myself in the mirror. Dark hair escaping my braid. Smudge of somebody else's blood at my collarbone. A tiny cut at my knee. Eyes too wide. On the hook behind the door hung a navy cashmere sweater that smelled faintly of cedar. When I pulled it on after showering, the sleeves swallowed my hands. I should have hated wearing something of his. Instead, the softness nearly undid me. When I came downstairs, Maria had left soup, bread, and a plate of sliced pears on a small table in a sitting room lined with books. Dante stood by the fireplace, one shoulder against the mantel, reading something on his phone. He looked up once. His gaze slid over the sweater, paused, and moved on. Eat. I sat because my legs had started to notice the day. Why am I here? Because Bruno Ferrante is vain, loose-tongued. And now embarrassed. That was the man in the restaurant, the man who mistook loudness for leverage. And you, he slipped his phone into his pocket. I rarely mistake anything. I took a spoonful of soup mostly so I'd have an excuse not to answer that. He watched until I swallowed. You went to the wound first. I looked up sharply. At the restaurant, he said. You never asked who was in charge. You didn't beg. You didn't freeze. You saw blood and did something useful. I set the spoon down carefully. Was that unusual? For my world, he held my gaze. Yes. The room went quiet around that one word. I forced myself to pick the spoon back up. If this is gratitude, it's unnerving. Get used to unnerving. I hated how quickly my pulse answered him. Tommaso stuck his head into the room. Boss, there's a pigeon on the terrace rail again. I'm mentioning it because I value transparency. I stared at him. He stared back with solemn misery. Wings are dishonest. Go to bed, Tommaso, Dante said, with joy, with visible relief. With the dream that Maria one day stops trying to seduce me into an early grave via carbohydrates. After he vanished, Dante rubbed a hand once over his mouth, as if suppressing something that might have been amusement. I said he works for you, against my better judgment. You let strange people live in your house. You're not living here. Temporarily remaining alive here. I should have been insulted by the phrasing. Instead, I looked down at the soup and asked the question that mattered. What are your rules? Dante did not answer immediately. He crossed to the sideboard, lifted a bottle, and poured amber liquid into a crystal glass. The signet ring clicked softly at the rim. 1, he said, you don't leave without telling me. He turned. 2, you don't answer unknown numbers. He took a sip. 3, if I tell you to get down, you get down before your fear catches up and starts arguing. And if I break a rule, his face did not change. You won't. I stood too fast, nerves making me foolish. You don't know me. He took a single step closer. No, he said quietly. But I know what kind of trouble comes after a room watches a man choose a side. That landed harder than it should have. I folded my arms because otherwise I might have done something ridiculous, like reach for the glass to stop listening to that click. I want to go home. His gaze dropped to my bare feet on the rug, then rose again. I know. Then let me. He held the silence until I felt it in my throat. Not tonight, quiet one. He left the room. A second later, I heard the lock turn on the outer hall door. Morning in Dante Salvator's house arrived on the smell of espresso and butter. For one confused second, wrapped in 2 soft sheets in a room that was not mine, I forgot everything. Then the previous night returned in pieces. Broken crystal, blood on marble, the weight of a man's attention. I dressed in clothes Maria had somehow procured in my exact size, which only increased the sense that I had stumbled into a machine built long before me. Downstairs, the kitchen glowed with early light. Copper pans hung from a rack over the island. Lemons sat in a blue bowl like small suns. Maria stood over a stand mixer with the concentration of a field general. "You know pastry cream?" she asked without preamble. I stopped in the doorway. "Yes." "Good." The girl who usually pipes the Maritazzi called in lovesick. That answer was so perfectly Italian I nearly smiled. "That's a medical condition now. In this house, yes." "Wash your hands." It was the first normal thing anyone had said to me in 12 hours, so I did. I whisked egg yolks, sugar, orange zest. My hands steadied the way they always did around ingredients. Baking had rules that made sense. Heat mattered, timing mattered. You could ruin something and know exactly how. Maria watched once, grunted approval, and moved aside without announcing it as kindness. "You were trained," she said. "Culinary school for a year." "Nights only." What happened? Life. That answer satisfied her more than details would have. By the time the cream thickened and the buns came out golden, I had nearly forgotten whose house I was in. Then the kitchen doors opened, and 3 men entered mid-conversation, all dark suits and lowered voices. The room changed shape around the one in front. Dante stopped when he saw me dusted in flour to the wrists. Tommaso behind him lit up. "Maria, is that cream?" "If I die today, I want it recorded that I died betrayed." "You're not eating sugar before noon," Maria snapped. "Then my suffering is now political." Dante's eyes were on the pastry bag in my hand. "You cook, bake," I corrected before I could stop myself. One of the men beside him, older, silver at the temples, looked between us with interest. "She corrects you." "Brave, Enzo," Dante said mildly, and the man's mouth twitched shut. I finished piping the cream because I did not know what else to do with my heartbeat. Dante came around the island, stopped beside the tray, and looked down. "What is this one?" he asked. "Candied lemon on top," I said. "Orange blossom in the cream. You taste everything before it goes out." "Yes." "Why?" I looked at him. "Because if somebody trusts me enough to eat what I make, I don't want to be careless." Something tightened in his face so quickly it was nearly invisible. Tommaso accepted a Maritazzo Maria allowed him under furious protest, took one bite, and actually closed his eyes. "If loving this is wrong, then I reject salvation." Maria made a disgusted sound that fooled nobody. Later, while the house moved around calls and polished shoes and decisions I was not invited to hear, Maria set aside a bowl of dark chocolate ganache and a pot of lemon cream. "Make something for tonight," she said, "for no reason." "For no reason," she lifted one shoulder. "Everything in this house needs a reason." "I'm tired." So I made what my mother had once called a quiet dessert, thin layer of bitter chocolate at the base, lemon cream in the middle. A shell of caramelized sugar on top so fragile it cracked if you breathed too hard. Tommaso wandered in halfway through and watched me spin the sugar. "What do you call it?" "Nothing. Everything needs a name," he said. "Not everything." He leaned against the counter, lowering his voice. "You know he hasn't let anyone use this kitchen without checking first." I kept my eyes on the pan. "Then I should probably leave before he regrets it. He already regrets breathing." It changes nothing. I almost smiled. Then Dante's shadow fell across the tiles. Tommaso vanished with the instincts of the professionally employed. Dante looked at the plated dessert. "What is it?" I hesitated. "It doesn't have a name." He waited. "Bitter on the bottom," I said, annoyed by my own sudden self-consciousness. "Soft in the middle. Breakable on top." His gaze lifted from the sugar shell to my face. "Useful architecture. It holds." "For how long?" I set the torch down. "Until someone touches it." He reached past me for the plate, not touching me, not quite, close enough that the clean, dark scent of him slid under my skin anyway. His knuckles brushed the counter beside my hand. Almost. He tasted the dessert. His expression did not change, but he did not set the fork down right away either. "Too much lemon?" I asked before I could help myself. "No." His voice was lower than usual, exactly enough. A phone rang somewhere deeper in the house. He looked away first. "Tonight," he said, returning to himself, "you'll stay upstairs." "Why?" "Because something is moving." He turned and walked out. I stood alone in the kitchen, furious that the room felt emptier after he left. When Enzo placed the file on his desk that afternoon, Dante already knew what name he would see. Paolo Marini. Restaurant pianist, civilian witness, dead 3 years after Giulia bled out on the floor beside him, the only man in that room who had crawled through glass to help a dying child. Dante looked down at the neat script on the old incident report, then at the image from the previous night in his head. Elena Marini tearing her apron with steady hands, going to the wound first. He had not protected her because she was innocent. He had protected her because hesitation had already buried one family named Marini in his bones. By the 4th day, my fear had changed shape. It was still fear. I wasn't romantic enough or stupid enough to call it anything else, but it had become specific. I knew which floorboards creaked outside my room. I knew Maria sang under her breath when she was angry. I knew Tommaso drank coffee like a man trying to punish his own bloodstream. And I knew Dante could enter a room so quietly that you only realized he was there when everyone else had already rearranged themselves around him. That afternoon, he took me with them. "Why?" I asked as the car pulled away from the townhouse. Rain needled the windows. Tommaso was driving with the pained dignity of a man denied breakfast pastries. Dante sat beside me in the back seat, one leg crossed, phone dark in his hand. "Because the safer place changes by the hour." "That's not an answer. It's the one you're getting." Tommaso glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "If it helps, I also hate his educational style. It doesn't, see, honesty, refreshing. Terrible for morale." We drove downtown to a church I recognized from childhood Christmas masses, though I had never seen armed men stationed in the vestibule before. Dante met with a priest in a side office while I waited with Bianca Ferrero, the doctor from Belladonna. Up close, she was even more severe, which somehow made the kindness in her more startling. "You should leave him," she said, not unkindly. I stared. "That seems difficult when men keep putting guns near me." "That's exactly why I said it." Bianca adjusted the cuff of her coat. "Dante is not careless. If you are near him, it is because staying near him is the least dangerous option right now. That is not the same as safe. So your advice is what?" "Run." "My advice," she said, "is do not mistake restraint for peace." Before I could answer, shouting erupted in the nave. Bianca's head snapped up. Dante was already moving, coming out of the side office with lethal calm. 2 men burst through the church doors, one bleeding from the shoulder, one reaching inside his coat. I didn't think. I dropped behind a pillar on instinct just as Dante shoved Bianca sideways and drew his gun. The sound of the first shot inside a church did something ugly to my bones. Tommaso swore from somewhere near the entrance. A candle stand crashed. Rain blew in through the open doors and turned the marble slick. The second gunman lunged in my direction. He never reached me. Dante crossed the distance with horrifying efficiency. One hand caught the man's wrist. The other slammed him face first into the pillar hard enough to crack something that was probably not marble. Dante disarmed him almost lazily, then stepped between us before the body hit the floor. "Down," he said without looking at me. I was already down. Outside, tires screamed away. The attack was over as abruptly as it had begun. Men moved in. Orders snapped. Bianca knelt beside the wounded guard. I realized then that my breathing had gone jagged and loud. Dante turned. There was blood on his knuckles. Not much, enough. He crouched in front of me. "Are you hit?" I shook my head. "Look at me." I did. He put 2 fingers lightly at the side of my throat where my pulse was kicking itself apart. The touch was clinical. It was also the first time he had touched me anywhere that wasn't accident or absence. My whole body went still. "Breathe," he said. I hated that I obeyed. Behind us, Tommaso muttered, "Dear Lord, thank you for not letting the boss kill anyone in a church." "Publicly, I mean," Bianca, tying off a bandage, said. "Tommaso, I'm coping." Dante's hand remained at my throat 1 second too long, almost. Then he took it away. His gaze dropped to the small silver cross at my neck. "Your father gave you that." I blinked. "How do you know it was my father?" "Because you touch it when you lie." Heat rose unexpectedly to my face. "I'm not lying." "Then you're frightened." "That isn't new." For the first time since the shooting, something in his expression softened, not enough to call gentle. Enough to be dangerous in a different way. He stood and held out his hand. I stared at it. Rain tapped the stained glass windows. Somewhere near the front, one of the men on the floor groaned. "Quiet one," Dante said, low enough only I heard it. "I don't have all day." I put my hand in his. It should not have mattered. It was only a hand. Warm, dry despite the rain, calloused at the base of the fingers. He pulled me up with care that felt worse than roughness would have. At the car, Tommaso opened my door and glanced up at the church roof with immediate suspicion. A pigeon flapped from the gutter. He recoiled half a step. "See. Agents of chaos." "Incredible," Bianca said. "Thank you." Back at the townhouse, Dante disappeared into his office with Enzo and 3 other men. Raised voices traveled faintly through old wood. Maria made tea I didn't drink. My hands would not stop shaking. When Dante came back out an hour later, his cuff was ripped and there was a thin red line under his jaw. "You're hurt," I said. He looked almost surprised by that. "It's nothing." "That isn't an answer either." A beat. Then he stepped closer. "They weren't aiming at you today." Comforting. "It should be." I looked at the line of blood at his throat and then away. "Who were they aiming at?" His silence answered well enough. I swallowed. "And I'm with you because..." He glanced toward the closed office door. "Because whoever sent them thought a church was neutral ground." "What does that mean?" "It means," he said, voice going flat again, "there are no neutral places left." That night, when I went upstairs, I found his jacket hanging over the chair in my room. No note, no explanation, just dark wool still carrying the cold scent of rain and him. I sat on the edge of the bed with my fingers curled in the lining until sleep finally took me. The first time I understood how power moved in Dante's world was at a charity dinner for a hospital wing his family, publicly funded and privately controlled. Nobody called it a mafia event. Nobody had to. The ballroom was all chandeliers and white roses, the kind of room built to make bad men look ceremonial. Maria had sent me in a black dress with a high neck and strict instructions not to apologize for existing. Bianca adjusted the clasp at my back and muttered, "If anyone bores you, fake fainting." It works more often than it should. Dante arrived late enough to make lateness look deliberate. The room noticed. He wore a dark suit, no tie, and the same signet ring that had become, against my will, a sound I listened for. Click against crystal, metal against glass, a warning and a promise in one small noise. He stopped beside me before taking his seat. "You look uncomfortable," he said. "I am uncomfortable." "Good. Then your instincts are intact." I should have been offended. Instead, I looked at the line of his collar and said, "That's not reassuring." His gaze flicked to my mouth, then away. Almost. Dinner moved in courses and speeches and lies polished smooth for donors. I stayed close to Bianca and answered only when spoken to. Across the room, Vittorio Caruso smiled at everyone with the ease of a man used to being liked. He was Dante's cousin, I had learned. Older by a few years, beautiful in a colder way. Where Dante's stillness felt like choice, Vittorio's felt like appetite held on a short leash. He kissed Bianca's cheek as he passed our table. "And who is this?" "Elena Marini," Bianca said before I could. "Ah," Vittorio's eyes settled on me with too much interest and no warmth at all. "The famous Waitress. Your reputation precedes you," I murmured. He laughed. "Does it?" "Usually that means someone has been lying kindly." Dante looked up from across the table at exactly that moment. Vittorio stepped away. The dessert course came with espresso ganache tarts, candied orange peel, and a warm almond syrup poured tableside from silver pots. The waiter serving Dante reached for the pot at our end of the table. I smelled it before he tilted the spout. Not almond, bitter almond. Wrong, I caught his wrist. He froze. So did everyone else close enough to see. "Don't," I said. The waiter stared at me. "Miss, set it down." Dante was on his feet before anyone else fully understood why. The room folded into silence around us. I took the silver pot from the waiter's hand and brought it to my nose. Bitter almond, faint but distinct, buried under burnt sugar. The exact smell of kernels split too aggressively. Or poison if you'd grown up around kitchen warnings and old-world remedies. "What is it?" Bianca asked. I didn't answer her. I looked at Dante. "Do not let anyone drink anything poured from this," I said, and heard how steady I sounded. "Please." That one word was the first time I had ever asked him for anything. Dante's face changed by half a degree. "Bianca," she was already moving. So were his men, quietly, efficiently. No panic. That frightened me more than shouting would have. Bianca uncapped a testing strip from her clutch, as if she routinely attended galas prepared for chemical warfare, and dipped it into the syrup. 3 seconds later, her jaw locked. "Cyanogenic compound," she said, "concentrated enough to kill." The room did not erupt. It sealed. Dante took the silver pot from me with careful fingers. "Who prepared this table?" Nobody answered quickly enough. He did not raise his voice. "Ask me again how I punish hesitation." Across the ballroom, donors still laughed at something the MC had said, unaware that death had nearly been plated between the roses. Vittorio reappeared at Dante's shoulder, all smooth concern. "What happened?" Dante looked at him once. "Someone made a mistake." Vittorio's expression remained composed, but his eyes sharpened. "Do you need me to clear the room?" "No." That one syllable landed like a blade laid flat on linen. Later, behind a closed service corridor door, Bianca finished on the phone with the lab and turned to me. "How did you know?" "My father taught me that smell when I was 12. My throat had started working again. Barely. He used to say sugar can hide many sins, but not all of them." Dante stood at the far end of the narrow corridor, hands in his pockets, watching me as if I had become a problem he had not planned for. "My father was a pianist," I went on, "because nerves made me foolish. At restaurants he knew chefs. He liked old recipes, old warnings, old everything." Dante said very quietly, "Paolo Marini." I stared. "You knew my father?" A long silence. Bianca looked between us with sudden understanding and equal alarm. Dante's gaze held mine. "Years ago." "How?" He ignored the question, which was answer enough to set anger prickling under my skin. "From now on you taste nothing you didn't make yourself." "Excuse me, you heard me. That's your response." "My response," he said, stepping closer, Is that someone just used a public room full of witnesses to send a message, and you interrupted it? I tipped my chin up because he made backing down feel like drowning. Maybe they should be more careful what they serve. A pulse moved once in his jaw. You think this is a kitchen error? I think you don't explain anything. No, he said. I don't. That should have ended it. Instead, I said the worst possible thing. I'm not one of your men. His eyes darkened. No, you are not. The corridor went very still. Almost. Then Enzo appeared at the door with a face gone hard. Boss, the waiter is dead. Dante looked away from me first. And in that one turning of his head, I understood betrayal had already entered the room before dessert. After the poison syrup, the house stopped pretending I was temporary. 2 guards rotated outside my door. Enzo stopped saying if and started saying when. Bianca taught me how to use the panic button by the bed, with the expression of a doctor introducing a patient to a lifelong medication. Even Tommaso's jokes thinned at the edges. Congratulations, he told me over breakfast 2 days later. You now live in what I professionally describe as a very expensive panic attack. Maria shoved a bowl of figs into his hands. Eat fruit and stop narrating doom. I don't fear doom, he said. I fear carbohydrates and being single forever. From the corner, Bianca said, one of those is fixable. Tommaso sighed toward the ceiling. Maria, she wounds me because she cannot admit she cares. Maria threw a kitchen towel at his head. I smiled in spite of everything. Dante, entering just then, caught the towel one-handed without looking and set it on the counter. His gaze found me first. It always did now, as if checking I was still in the room cost him nothing and everything at once. We're going out, he said. Where? To Giulia. The name meant nothing to me then. It would later. He took me to a small ruined chapel on family land north of the city, where the stone walls had half collapsed, and ivy crept over old saints with broken noses. There was a graveyard behind it fenced in black iron. Rain had passed through earlier and left the world smelling green and washed raw. At the center of the smallest plot stood a white marker carved with one name, Giulia Salvator. I stopped a respectful distance back. Dante set down a bouquet of pale lilies. The wind moved once through the trees. His posture did not change, but I felt something close around him. She was your sister, I said. Yes. He did not say more. He did not need to. Grief stood beside him like a second body. I should have left him to it. Instead, I stepped closer and placed the small lemon tart Maria had bullied me into making that morning at the base of the stone. Why that? He asked without looking at me. Because lilies are for the dead, I said softly. Sugar is for the people who miss them. His eyes closed once, briefly. That was when the first shot cracked through the trees. Dante moved before the sound had fully finished. He turned, caught me around the waist, and drove us both behind the ruined chapel wall. Stones scraped my palm. A second shot split mortar inches above where my head had been. Stay down, he said. There was blood on his sleeve. I think I said his name, I'm not sure. My ears were ringing. Men shouted from the tree line. Dante drew his gun, calm gone thin and lethal. He fired twice, economical as breath. One body fell hard enough for me to hear it over the pounding in my head. A third man came around the wall. I had the tart server still in my hand. Reflex, terror, stupid courage, whatever it was, I drove the metal edge into his forearm before he could raise his weapon. He shouted. Dante finished the movement for both of us, wrenching the gun away and dropping him to the wet grass. Then it was over, not because fear left, because Dante had ended it. He turned to me, breathing hard for the first time since I had met him. You're hurt? I asked. Later. No, I grabbed his arm before he could step away. The bullet had grazed high along his side, not deep but bloody enough to turn my stomach cold. Sit down. He stared at me as if no one had used that tone with him in years. Dante. Something in my voice made him obey. Inside the ruined chapel, dust and damp stone wrapped around us. I tore a strip from the lining of my coat and pressed it to the wound. He hissed once through his teeth, then went still. The silence between us thickened. "You do this every time," he said at last. "What? You go to the wound first." I looked up. His face was close. Too close. Rainwater darkened the ends of his hair. There was a scrape along his cheekbone. I wanted, with a force that embarrassed me, to put my mouth there and make that injury mine to soothe. The thought shocked me quiet. He saw something happen in my face. I knew he did. Dante, she had done it again. Not begged, not frozen, not looked to him for permission to be brave. She went to blood as if fear came second in her bones. Giulia had been 15 when she died. Paolo Marini had crossed broken glass to help her while grown men waited for orders. Dante had built an empire out of never waiting again. And Alina, small hands firm against his ribs, mouth trembling only when she thought he might bleed through them, had reached straight into the oldest wound he carried and touched it without knowing. Not because she was beautiful, because she was the only one who still moved toward pain like it mattered more than power. "Alina," he said, and her name sounded dangerous in his own mouth. I felt the shift in him before he moved. His hand came up not to take, but to cup the back of my neck with care so restrained it hurt. Quiet One. The nickname landed differently there. Less observation, more confession. I should have moved back. I didn't. His forehead touched mine. The air between us had already changed. I knew it. He knew it. The ruined saints watched and said nothing. "If you stop now," I whispered, voice unsteady, "I think I'll feel it for weeks." His breath caught. That was all I gave him, all I could. He kissed me like a man holding a live wire with bare hands. Slow, careful, as if he could still choose not to. His mouth was warm, then gentler than I knew what to do with, then gone before the kiss could become more than the exact thing it already was. Almost, finally real, not enough. He leaned back first, eyes shut tight once like it cost him. "War's here," he said. Outside, sirens were already climbing the road. War, I learned, did not always announce itself with bullets. Sometimes it came as reduced staff, changed routes, extra cars, Maria crying in the pantry where nobody could see, Bianca sleeping in her office chair for 22 minutes at a time, and Dante growing quieter instead of louder. The house filled with men who spoke in low Italian and stopped mid-sentence when I entered. I had crossed some line in the ruined chapel, not into safety, into truth. I was no longer afraid of Dante in the same way. That terrified me more. A week later, I made the mistake that changed everything. Nico called from an unknown number while the ticket arrived in a plain cream envelope. No note, no explanation. Just 2 train stubs under false names. A key to an apartment I did not recognize, enough cash to terrify me, and a folded sheet with one address in Vermont typed in clean black ink. When I looked up, Dante was standing in the doorway of the sitting room, one hand in his coat pocket, the late afternoon light cutting his face into hard planes and shadow. "For tonight," he said. I stared at the tickets. "For who?" "You and your brother." Something cold and bright went through me. "You're sending me away. I'm keeping you alive. That's not the same thing." "No," he said. "It is." The room seemed to narrow around the distance between us. A week had passed since the ruined chapel. A week since his mouth on mine, careful like restraint, could still change what it was. Since then war had settled over the house like smoke, and he had become all edges again. Present, watchful, untouchable, I held up the tickets. "Is this because you regret it?" His gaze flicked to my hand, then to my face. "This is because what comes next won't stop at threats." "That isn't what I asked." His jaw tightened once. "Alina." There were 100 ways he could say my name. This one meant don't push. I pushed anyway. "You kiss me in a chapel and then buy me onto a train." A pulse moved in his throat. "I'm giving you a door. And if I don't want one?" His eyes settled on me with that terrible steadiness of his. Then for once in your life, quiet one, choose the option that doesn't bleed. I laughed once without humor. You really don't know me at all. Something in his face changed. Small, dangerous. I know enough, he said. The car leaves at 7. Tommaso will take you to collect Nico first. I didn't agree. You don't have to agree. You have to survive. I should have thrown the tickets at him. I should have said something unforgivable. Instead, I asked the question that mattered and hated how unsteady it sounded. Are you coming? His silence answered before he did. No. The word landed in me like a bruise. He looked at the envelope once more, then back at me. Be ready. When he left, he did not lock the door behind him. That hurt more than if he had. For 10 long minutes I stood in the middle of the room holding the tickets while the house breathed around me. Men moved in distant halls. A phone rang somewhere and was answered too quickly. Maria shouted at somebody about sauce. Life continued with the rude indifference of all large houses, even when your own had just tilted off its foundation. Then my phone lit up with an unknown number. I stared at it. Rule 2, he had said. You don't answer unknown numbers. It rang again. Something old and frightened in me already knew. I answered. Nico? His breath hit the line first, ragged, fast. Elena, relief broke through me so hard it hurt. Nico, where are you? A sound like a muffled groan. Then another voice came on, male, smooth. Educated, smiling through the words. At the river, he said, with your brother who has been brave enough to make this inconvenient. Every part of me went cold. Put him back on. Come alone and I'll consider it. My hand tightened around the phone. Who is this? You already know enough men with excellent tailoring and poor morals. Add one more. In the background I heard Nico curse, then a sharp impact and a strangled cry. Stop, the word tore out of me. Pier 42 in Red Hook, the man said mildly. 30 minutes. No Dante, no guards. If I see anyone except you, your brother loses something he'll miss. The line went dead. I stood there hearing nothing but blood. For one mad second, I thought of running straight to Dante's office, of putting the phone in his hand, of letting the house explode into movement and guns and orders and men. Then I saw it exactly as whoever had arranged this wanted me to see it. Dante hearing Nico's name. Dante going to the river armed and merciless, bodies in the dark. My brother somewhere in the middle of it. I looked down at the cream envelope still in my hand. A door. He had given me a door and I was about to use it wrong. I moved fast after that. Coat, boots. Cash from the envelope. The smaller of the 2 tickets folded into my pocket for no reason except panic-like props. I wrote Maria a lie on the back of an old grocery list, gone early. Don't wake anyone, and hated myself while I did it. In the hall, no one stopped me. Of course, no one stopped me. Dante had told the house I was leaving tonight. The front door opened before I reached for it. One of the guards nodded once, already expecting Tommaso's car. Trust, in Dante's world, came rarely and all at once. I walked through it and broke it with both hands. The city was iron gray by the time I reached Red Hook. The river smelled like rust and gasoline. Wind came off the water hard enough to sting. Pier 42 was mostly dark, a long rib of rotting wood and corrugated metal pushing into the black water. A single lamp buzzed over the warehouse door. Nico was on his knees beneath it. My whole body stopped. His mouth was bloodied, one eye already swelling. His hands were zip-tied behind him. When he saw me, he made a sound that was half fury, half despair. No, he said hoarsely. No, Elena, go. A man standing behind him drove a knee into his spine. Nico choked on air. Enough, said a familiar voice. Vittorio Caruso stepped out of the shadows in a dark overcoat, immaculate as ever, rain silvering his hair at the temples. He looked less like a man waiting on a dock than a senator arriving late to a fundraiser. I felt the world tilt. Surprised, he asked. I could barely get the words out. You, Vittorio's smile was elegant and dead. That stings. I was aiming for inevitability. I took one step toward Nico. 3 men appeared from the dark with guns drawn, and I stopped. "What do you want?" "You," he said simply, quietly, efficiently, preferably without my cousin turning the city inside out before midnight. My voice shook and did not break. "Let my brother go." Vittorio glanced at Nico as if remembering a coat he'd left somewhere. "Your brother is an unfortunate hobby of yours. I'm trying not to judge." Nico lifted his head with obvious effort. "He's lying. Don't." The man behind him hit him across the mouth with the butt of a gun. I moved before thought caught up. "Stop touching him." Vittorio's gaze returned to me, interested now. "There she is, the girl who runs to blood." Rain ticked against the metal roof behind them. The river slapped the pilings below. Somewhere far off, a horn sounded from the harbor. I could hear Dante in my head as clearly as if he stood behind me. "If I tell you to get down, not tonight. Not here." I looked at Nico. At the blood on his chin, at the way he was trying not to let me see fear and failing. Then I did the stupid, loving thing I had apparently been built to do. "I'll go with you," I said. "No fight." "No, Dante, just let him walk away." Nico made a broken sound. "Elena, don't." Vittorio studied me for a long moment. "You really believe surrender is the same thing as control?" "I believe bargains can be witnessed," I said, louder now, glancing at the men around him. "You said if I came alone, he lives." For the first time, something meaner showed through Vittorio's polish. "Did I?" I went cold all over. He took one step toward me. "Dante's weakness has always been the same. He thinks grief can make men principled. It only makes them sentimental. You were never meant to be leverage for me, Elena. You were meant to make him choose." "Choose what?" "Everything after." Nico lunged then. It was stupid, brave, completely useless. He drove backward into the man holding him, hard enough to throw the aim off for half a heartbeat. The shot still went off. For one impossible second, I did not understand the sound. Then Nico folded sideways onto the wet boards with a cry so raw it stripped the world down to nerve. I think I screamed. The bullet had hit high in his shoulder. Blood spread dark and immediate through his jacket. I ran. Someone caught me by the arm before I reached him. I twisted so hard pain flashed white through my shoulder. "Let me go." Nico was trying to breathe, trying and failing. Vittorio looked down at him with mild annoyance, as if this were a scheduling error rather than a human body opening on the pier. "That," he said, "was avoidable." I went still in the grip of the man holding me, not calm, something worse. "You said." "I lie beautifully," Vittorio said. The river wind tore across the dock. Behind the warehouse, tires screamed. Every head turned. A black car hit the pier, approached too fast, fishtailed once, corrected, and came straight through the rain like judgment with headlights. Tommaso was driving. Dante stepped out before the car had fully stopped. He did not slam the door. He did not shout. He just looked at Nico bleeding on the dock, at my arm in another man's hand, and then at Vittorio. The signet ring on his right hand struck the roof of the car once. Click. Even the river seemed to hold its breath. Dante's voice carried across the pier, soft enough to be intimate, cold enough to kill. "You touched what was mine." Vittorio smiled then, and all charm dropped out of him like a discarded mask. "At last," he said, and the night split open. Everything happened at once. One of Vittorio's men shoved me hard enough to send me stumbling across the wet boards. Another raised his gun toward Dante. Tommaso swore with a level of invention that would have impressed Maria and ducked behind the open car door as the first shots cracked through the rain. Dante did not reach for cover. He moved. Later, if I tried to remember it in order, I couldn't. I only remembered pieces. The black line of his coat cutting through the storm, the flash at his hand. A man dropping before he had finished lifting his weapon. Vittorio stepping back, finally losing the smooth ease he wore like cologne. Nico made a sound on the dock behind me. That brought the world back into one terrible point. Blood was running under him fast. I dropped to my knees. Elena, no, Nico's voice broke on the word. Be quiet, I snapped, hands already at his shoulder. You need to be quiet. The bullet had gone through the upper part of his shoulder, close enough to the clavicle to make my stomach turn. Too much blood, but the wrong kind for the heart. Thank God. Thank every exhausted saint in the harbor. I tore off my coat and balled it hard against the wound. Nico hissed and tried to jerk away. Don't you dare, I said. Not tonight. The dock shook under running feet. Somebody screamed. The river wind whipped my hair across my face and filled my mouth with salt and rain. A body hit the boards less than 10 feet from us. I looked up. Dante stood over one of Vittorio's men, gun still in his hand, expression emptied of everything human except intention. There was blood on his cuff again. Maybe his, probably not. His eyes found me once, found the blood spreading under Nico, and changed. He turned that gaze on Vittorio. Look at him, Dante said. Vittorio had backed toward the warehouse doors. 2 men remained near him, uncertain now in the way men became uncertain only after they had already chosen the wrong side. This was always your weakness, Vittorio said over the rain. You make altars out of dead things. Dante took 1 step forward. And you mistake patience for mercy. The signet ring flashed at his hand. I heard the soft click as he shifted his grip. Even now, even here, that sound went through me. Vittorio's mouth curved in something that wanted to be a smile. You claim a waitress on a dock in front of my men, and you think that makes her safe. Dante's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. No, I think it makes you obvious. Gunfire burst again from the far end of the pier. One of the remaining men near Vittorio folded. The other fired wild toward the car, where Tommaso popped up long enough to return a shot with offended accuracy. I hate docks, he shouted. They combine my least favorite things, rain, splinters, and criminal cousins. Under any other circumstances, I might have laughed. Instead, I leaned harder on Nico's wound as he groaned against the boards. Stay with me. I'm here, he gasped. Unfortunately. That's my line. His face had gone gray around the mouth. Bad. Very bad, I looked up sharply. Dante, he heard the difference in my voice at once. He always heard it. For 1 suspended second, the pier held 2 possible futures. In one, he went after Vittorio. Ended it here. Paid the city back in blood. In the other, he turned away from the man who had betrayed him since the beginning and came to the wound first. Vittorio knew it too. I saw it in the sharpened watchfulness of his face. Choose, his whole body seemed to say. Dante did. He lowered the gun by an inch. Not surrender, decision. Tommaso, he said without looking away from me, take the cousin if you can. If not, break his road home. Tommaso from behind the car, finally a motivational slogan. Then Dante came to us. Vittorio's expression changed for the first time that night. Not fear exactly, something more offended, as if Dante had insulted him by refusing to make him the center of the scene. You turn your back on this, Vittorio called after him. Dante crouched beside me and looked down at Nico's shoulder. His calm returned all at once, but thinner now, stretched over something violent and blazing. To kill you, he asked softly. No. To let you watch me choose something else. That landed harder than any bullet. Vittorio's face went flat. Pressure's good, Dante said to me, eyes on my hands. Through and through, I think so. You think? I know enough. Nico tried to laugh and nearly passed out instead. Dante shrugged off his coat and folded it under Nico's head without a word. Then he stripped off his tie, slid one hand under my brother's shoulder and said, "Lift when I tell you." I stared at him for half a beat. There was blood on the dock, men with guns in the rain. Vittorio somewhere behind us, not dead enough for my comfort. And Dante was helping me stabilize my brother like the whole world had narrowed to this one injury. Quiet one. I realized he had already spoken once. What? Lift. We moved together. His hand was sure at Nico's back, mine locked on the makeshift compress. Nico cried out, a raw animal sound, and then sagged against us. Good, I whispered, though I had no idea whether that was true. Good, stay angry, Nico. I need you angry. I'm furious, he muttered through his teeth, at all of you. That's healthy. A shot rang out from farther down the pier, then another, then only rain. Tommaso's voice came floating back. Update. I did not get the cousin, but I have seriously damaged his sense of evening decorum. Car, Dante said. He stood, lifted Nico as if pain were an inconvenience he personally refused to recognize, and carried him toward the sedan. I went with them, one hand still clamped over the wound. By the time we reached the back door, Nico was half-conscious and shivering. Dante lowered him carefully across the seat. Carefully. That was the part I would remember later, not the gun. Not the blood, the care. Bianca's on her way, Tommaso said, breathing hard as he ran back through the rain. His sleeve was torn and there was mud on one cheekbone. Enzo's locking bridges and tunnels, but your cousin had a second car. Also, for the record, I hate when family disputes involve ammunition. Dante shut the car door and looked at me. Just looked. Water ran down his face. His hair was plastered dark at the temples. His mouth was a hard line, but his eyes were not cold anymore. They were worse. They were furious in a way that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with the sight of me on a dock where I should never have been. You left, he said. I swallowed hard. Nico called, yes. I thought if I told you, he'd die in the middle. The words were flat, exact, no room in them for comfort. I lifted my chin because I had already lost too much tonight to bear his disappointment gently. I was trying to save him. I know. Something in the way he said it broke me a little. Rain drummed on the roof of the car. Tommaso tactfully moved several feet away and began muttering into his phone about route changes, stitches, and whether pigeons could be trained for assassination. I looked past Dante toward the river, where black water struck the pilings and came back again. He shot Nico because of me. No, Dante said. Dante, no. He stepped closer, close enough that his voice no longer had to travel. Vittorio shot your brother because he is weak enough to use love as leverage and too stupid to understand what it makes of a man when it fails. I stared at him. You don't get to carry his sins because you care for someone, he said. That accounting is mine. The wind shifted. Harbor lights burned in strips across the water. Somewhere behind us, sirens were getting louder. I became aware then that Dante had one hand braced on the open car door beside my shoulder, caging me there without touching me. Protecting the space before he protected himself. Again, I gave you a door, he said, lower now. You used it to walk into a trap. I know. You will never do that to me again. The words should have sounded like an order. They sounded like fear. My throat tightened. I thought you were sending me away. His jaw flexed once. I was. Why? A long silence. Rain slipping from his lashes. The city holding itself back for one more second. Because if I kept you near me, he said at last, I was going to stop pretending this was temporary. Every hurt feeling I had been clutching at since the train ticket simply vanished. Burned off by the force of that truth. I looked at his mouth, then back at his eyes. Behind us, Nico made a weak sound from the back seat that might have been nausea or commentary. Tommaso blessedly said, I'm going to open the other door and not witness anything regrettable. Neither of us moved. Dante reached up then, very slowly, and touched 2 fingers to the side of my neck where my pulse was hammering itself stupid. The same place as the church. The same unbearable restraint. This ends now, he said softly. He wanted war. He gets it. I should have been frightened by how calm he sounded. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. And me? His hand stayed at my throat 1 heartbeat longer than necessary. You, Dante said, eyes fixed on mine, stay where I can see you. Then Bianca's car tore onto the pier in a spray of water and light, and the night started moving again. Bianca saved Nico on Dante's library rug. Not elegantly, not quietly, not in any way that would have suited the room. The bookshelves were walnut and old money. The rug was cream. The lamps were shaded silk. By the time Bianca had cut Nico's jacket open, ordered Tommaso to boil water he would never use, and turned one of Dante's good towels into a compress, the place looked like war had decided to read. "Hold him," Bianca snapped. I was already there. Nico drifted in and out, gray-faced and sweating, while I kept pressure on the wound and counted his breaths under mine. Dante stood 3 feet away with his jacket off, and his sleeves rolled to the forearms, not asking questions because he knew better than to waste the air in the room. Tommaso appeared with a medical kit, 3 flashlights, bottled water, and somehow a loaf of bread. Bianca stared at it. "Why is there bread?" Tommaso looked offended. "Maria said in emergencies you either need courage or carbohydrates. Your priorities are diseased. That is not new information." Nico made a small, pained sound that might have been a laugh. Relief nearly buckled me. Bianca probed carefully. "Missed the artery, through muscle. He's losing blood, but not the amount that kills fast if he cooperates." "Define cooperates," Nico muttered. "Does not speak," Bianca said. "That seems anti-family. Be grateful I'm not billing you." Dante crouched then, one knee on Bianca's ruined rug, and took the flashlight from Tommaso without being asked. He held it steady over the wound while Bianca worked. His hand did not shake. Neither did his voice when he said, "Stay awake." Nico blinked up at him through pain and blood loss. "You always this cheerful?" "No. Terrific." It took 27 minutes to clean the wound, stop the worst of the bleeding, stitch what Bianca could safely stitch in a house, and get Nico breathing like something less than a hunted animal. By the end, my hands were sticky to the wrist, and my shoulders had locked from tension so hard it felt like carrying stone. When Bianca straightened at last, she peeled off bloodied gloves and said, "He needs imaging tomorrow and a surgeon who asks fewer questions than most. Tonight he lives." The room exhaled. I hadn't realized Dante had been holding his breath until I heard his comeback. Tommaso passed Bianca a clean towel. "If this becomes a pattern," he said, "I'd like to formally object." "It has already become a pattern," Bianca replied. "That is devastating." Nico, half-conscious now on the sofa Bianca had commandeered, lifted his good hand weakly. "Elena." I went to him at once. His fingers closed around my wrist. "Don't," he said, voice hoarse. "Don't do brave things when stupid will kill you faster." Tears came so abruptly they made me angry. "You got shot." "Yes," he whispered. And yet somehow I remained the wiser sibling. I bent and pressed my forehead briefly to his. "Sleep." He did. Maria appeared in the doorway 2 minutes later, took in the blood, the wrecked towels, Tommaso hovering with coffee like a nervous undertaker, and crossed herself with real feeling. Then she looked at Dante. "You let this happen in my good house," she said. It was somehow not a question. Dante answered with perfect gravity. "Yes." Maria pointed at Tommaso. "Mop," he looked stricken. "Me? You're the one standing around with opinions. I have many other skills, none useful enough." For the first time since the dock, a sound escaped me that was almost laughter. Dante's eyes flicked to my face, just once. The look was so brief no one else would have caught it. I did. I found the music room by accident an hour later. The house had gone quieter after the worst was over. Enzo had come and gone with updates in a voice too low for me to catch. Bianca had settled into a chair near Nico with a blanket over her knees and the expression of a woman who slept only under active protest. Maria had bullied everyone except Dante into eating broth. Tommaso, mop in hand, had narrated his suffering to a degree that made murder seem restful. I turned down the wrong hallway trying to wash my hands and opened a door into another life. A grand piano sat under the windows, black lacquer turned soft by moonlight. Shelves of sheet music lined one wall. Framed recital programs hung beside them, charity concerts, conservatory nights, a Christmas fundraiser in Little Italy, all from years ago. Someone had kept the room dusted, loved even. The bench stood slightly crooked as if the last person to rise from it had meant to come back in a minute. I knew, before anyone told me, whose room it had been. I went to the sink in the adjoining washroom, scrubbed Nico's blood from my hands until the skin went pink, and came back out wiping them on a towel. Dante was in the doorway. He had changed his shirt. The new one was black again, open at the throat, sleeves still rolled. The cut under his jaw had been cleaned. It made him look more dangerous, not less. "Bianca says your brother will keep annoying us," he said. I nodded. He stepped inside and shut the door. The click of the latch sounded too intimate. "This was Giulia's room," he said. I looked at the piano. I guessed. She played badly for 6 years and beautifully for 1. Something in his voice made me turn. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the framed program nearest the door. I crossed the room and read the names under the old gold border. Giulia Salvator, piano. Paolo Marini, accompanying pianist. The air left my lungs in one clean, painful pull. My father. Yes. The word fell between us like something laid carefully on a table that still might shatter. I turned slowly. "You knew? I knew your surname the night at Belladonna. I knew your father's name. I knew what he did." My throat tightened. "And you said nothing." Dante took that without flinching. "No, why?" His gaze came to me at last, dark, tired, too steady. "Because I recognized you and still didn't know whether telling you would protect you or bury you under a second grief." Anger arrived before tears could. Thank God for that. "So you decided for me?" "Yes," I laughed once, bitter and stunned. "You do that a lot. When the alternatives are worse. That is not your choice to make." "No, a beat." "But I made it. I wanted to hate him. The problem was that he looked exactly like a man who hated himself just enough for both of us." I turned back to the program because the sight of him was doing strange things to my self-control. "Tell me." A long silence. Then quietly he did. Giulia was 15. There was supposed to be a simple dinner at Belladonna. Men speaking too softly about ugly things. My father brought her because she insisted on hearing the pianist play after dessert. His mouth shifted once, not quite a smile and too ruined to be one. "Your father told her she was rushing the chop-in." The image cut through me. My father, laughing under low restaurant lights. A girl at a piano bench rolling her eyes at instruction and taking it anyway. "She liked him immediately," Dante said. "Most people did." I swallowed hard. There was a disagreement that became a warning. A gun pulled too quickly. Chaos. Men freezing because everyone in that room was waiting to see who would move first. His voice stayed even. "That was the worst part. Your father moved. He crossed broken glass to get to her. He was on his knees with her when I got there." My eyes burned. "I was 17, Dante said. Old enough to understand what blood means on tile. Young enough to think rage was the same as power." He walked to the piano and rested 2 fingers on the lacquer lid without opening it. "Paolo stayed with her until she stopped breathing. Then he gave a statement he should never have had to give. 3 years later he died in a robbery too neat to be real." My head lifted sharply. "You think it wasn't a robbery?" "I know it was." The room went very still. I stared at him. "How?" Dante reached into his inside pocket and drew out a thin folder. He set it on the piano between us. Inside were copies, police reports, a morgue photo I turned face down at once, a witness statement with half the lines blacked out, a payment log from a shell company linked to Caruso Shipping, my father's name typed in block letters beside a date and an amount. "No," I said. "Yes." The word was quiet, merciless. "Vittorio," I whispered, "not alone, but his family's hands are on too much of this to be coincidence." My fingers tightened on the edge of the folder until the paper bent. He had my brother beaten to reach me. He poisoned your table. He killed your father because Paolo saw too much that night and did too much after. I shut my eyes. The room moved strangely, as if grief had weight and I had just stepped into its tide. When I spoke again, my voice sounded younger than I wanted. Did my father know that he was in danger? Dante asked. I nodded. He knew enough to hide things. My eyes opened. What things? Dante looked toward the piano bench. For a second I only stared at it. Then I crossed the room and lifted the seat. Inside, under old sheet music and a tuning wrench, lay a thin music book bound in cracked blue leather. My hands shook as I opened it. Notations covered the first pages in my father's cramped hand, fingerings, corrections, a joke about a violinist who couldn't count. Then, tucked into the center, one folded page. Names, dates. License plates, a phrase written twice as if he had wanted not to forget it. If anything happens, it was not random. I made a sound I had never heard from my own mouth. Dante did not touch me. That was its own violence. He left it here, I said. For Giulia, Dante said, or for whoever survived her. I pressed a hand over my mouth. My father came to Belladonna after Paolo died, he said. He found the book and hid it before the police were paid to lose everything else. I took Belladonna from him years later. When I found it, I knew one day it would matter. I looked up through tears. I no longer had the strength to fight. And you kept it for the right moment. Is this the right moment? His gaze held mine. No, that surprised a wet, broken laugh out of me. Then why tell me now? The answer took long enough that I thought he might not give it. Because he was Dante, he gave the cruel one and the honest one in the same breath. Because your brother nearly died for a lie, and I'm done protecting you with silence. Something in my chest gave way. I sat on the piano bench without meaning to. The old wood creaked under me. My father's handwriting blurred. After a moment I touched the keys. A soft chord sounded in the room, minor, unfinished. Dante went still. My father used to play that when he couldn't sleep, I said. Giulia asked him to teach it to her, Dante replied. I played the next two notes because my hands remembered even when the rest of me did not. When I stopped, the room had changed. He was closer now, not touching. Never touching first when it mattered most. What happens now? I asked. His eyes dropped briefly to my mouth and came back. Now, he said, voice low enough to alter the air, I stop losing what other men think they can take. He rested his hand on the piano beside mine, close enough for warmth, not enough for comfort. Outside the door, the house kept breathing. Inside, grief sat at the bench between us, and for the first time it felt less like a grave and more like a witness. By noon the next day, the city knew three things. Vittorio Caruso had missed a meeting he had once treated like inheritance. A Marini had bled on a dock and lived. And Dante Salvator was calling every captain, consigliere, broker, and parasite with an opinion to Belladonna by 8. Men like that heard summons the way dogs heard whistles. They came. Maria dressed me in dark green silk with sleeves to the wrist and a neckline high enough to qualify as armor. Bianca pinned my hair low and smooth, then stepped back with a doctor's clinical satisfaction. You look like trouble someone expensive should regret, she said. I feel like a hostage in better fabric. Excellent. Confidence is just fear with posture. Tommaso, adjusting his cuffs in the doorway, looked me over and put a hand briefly to his chest. If anyone insults you tonight, I will record their last words for archival purposes. You don't fight. I can narrate viciously while others do. Maria swatted the back of his head. Stop frightening her. I'm comforting her, aggressively. From the hall came the soft, unmistakable click of signet ring against crystal, not a glass, the marble console by the stairs this time. Still the sound went through the whole house. Dante entered in black. Of course he did. The suit was cut too well, the white of his shirt too sharp, the expression on his face controlled to the point of brutality. He looked at Tommaso first. The car. Tommaso straightened. Outside. Then Dante looked at me. He did not say I looked beautiful. Men like him did not waste truth by making it easy. His gaze moved from my face to the sleeves Maria had chosen, to the low knot of my hair, then back up again. "Stay near me tonight," he said. Bianca, fastening an earring of her own in the mirror, said dryly, "There's romance for you." Dante ignored her. I lifted my chin. "Is that an order?" "Yes." "Charming." "No," he said. "Useful," Tommaso sighed dreamily. He could write greeting cards if he believed in joy. Belladonna looked exactly as it had the night my life split open. The amber chandeliers, the polished walnut, the old mirrors catching candlelight, until the room seemed deeper than it was. Even the citrusan smoke smell lingered under the fresh flowers, as if some rooms never forgot what had happened inside them. The private room had been reset for a council. Long table. Crystal water glasses. Decanters placed like small acts of arrogance. Every seat filled except one, Vittorio's. When I stepped in behind Dante, conversation clipped off so sharply it felt physical. Men I recognized from Chapter 1 looked up and tried not to look shocked. Bruno Ferrante, whose grin I remembered with unusual clarity, leaned back in his chair and let his eyes travel over me in a way that made my skin go cold. "Amazing," he said. "The waitress comes back with a better dress." No one laughed. Dante stopped at the head of the table but did not sit. He looked at Bruno the way Winter looked at unprotected things. "Stand up," he said. Bruno blinked. "For what?" The room went even quieter. I heard Tommaso inhale beside the wall as if bracing for weather. Dante took one step toward the table. "You were given a simple instruction weeks ago. You failed it twice. Stand." Bruno stood. Dante didn't raise his voice. "Apologize." Something hot and terrible moved through the room. Not because of the word, because of who had been told to say it and to whom. Bruno gave a laugh too thin to survive on. The crystal tumbler nearest Dante's hand shattered. He hadn't thrown it. He had simply closed his fingers around it until it broke. Nobody moved. Dante let the glass fall from his hand in glittering pieces and said softly, "Choose your next word like it's your last one with teeth." Bruno swallowed. His gaze flicked to me, then away from me, then back again because humiliation made cowards perform. "My apology," he muttered. Dante waited. Bruno tried again. "Miss Marini." Louder. "I apologize, Miss Marini." The silence after that had a strange quality to it. Not relief, recognition. Every man at that table understood he had not just defended me. He had rearranged rank around me in front of all of them. Dante pulled out the chair to his right and looked at me. "Sit." It should have felt like a command. It felt worse. It felt like being chosen where everyone could see. I sat. Only then did Dante take his own seat at the head of the table. Enzo began the meeting with shipping numbers and route changes I barely followed. Names passed around the table like knives. 2 warehouses burned. 1 accountant missing. 3 men refusing calls and therefore almost certainly useless. Beneath the ordinary ugliness of organized business pulsed something else. Expectation. Everyone there knew the real subject had not yet been named. Halfway through the first course the door opened. Vittorio entered as if he owned lateness. Dark suit, silver watch, easy smile. Not one visible mark from the dock which offended me on principle. He paused when he saw me seated beside Dante. That smile shifted, not gone, sharpened. "Well," he said, removing his gloves, "this is new." "No," Dante replied. "This is overdue." Vittorio's gaze slid to the empty place halfway down the table. "You began without me." "You were delayed," Dante said. "Traffic." Tommaso from the wall behind him murmured to nobody, "By gunfire mostly." Vittorio's mouth twitched. Then he sat. Dinner resumed with all the false manners of a court where executions happened after dessert. I ate nothing. Across from me, Enzo unfolded a document packet and began distributing copies. I recognized the shell company name from the file in the music room. Caruso Holdings, Paolo Marini, Belladonna Witness Expense. Vittorio looked down once and went very still. That stillness told me more than any outburst could have. Dante rested one hand on the table. The signet ring caught the candlelight. "My cousin," he said conversationally, "has an allergy to loose ends." Nobody answered, so he continued. 3 years after my sister was killed at this restaurant, Paolo Marini died in what police filed as a robbery. These records show payments routed through a Caruso company to the officer who closed the file and the witness who changed his statement. Dante's gaze never left Vittorio. This same cousin then attempted to poison my table, murder a civilian woman under my protection, and use her brother as bait on my docks. Still nobody moved. That was the thing about true power. It made even breathing feel like a political act. Vittorio set down his napkin with perfect care. "That's a dramatic reading of coincidence." "Coincidence," Bianca said from the doorway, "does not test positive for cyanogenic compounds." Several heads turned. Bianca did not blink. Tommaso pushed off the wall and placed a small evidence bag on the table. Inside lay a silver syrup pot from the charity dinner. Inside a second bag, a spent shell casing from the dock. Inside a third, a warehouse access card with Vittorio's initials. "I made labels," he said, "for those who enjoy arts and crafts." Maria would have been proud. Vittorio smiled slowly. "You bring a doctor, a comedian, and a waitress to a council and think it becomes law." Dante leaned back by half an inch. "No," the room held. Then his hand moved, not fast, deliberate. He turned his palm and laid it, warm and unmistakable, over mine on the table where every man present could see. It was the first truly voluntary touch between us in public. My breath caught. Dante did not look at me when he spoke again. He looked at the room. "I bring the only witness in this city who has interrupted my cousin twice and lived," he said. "I bring the woman Paolo Marini died to protect. I bring blood, proof, and the patience not to start shooting before the soup is cleared." A chair scraped somewhere halfway down the table. Bruno, to his credit or terror, kept his eyes lowered. Vittorio's expression cooled into something almost blank. "You would put her on display like this?" Dante's thumb shifted once against the side of my hand. Restraint, claim, warning, all in the same tiny movement. "She is not on display," he said. "She is seated with me." The distinction landed like a blade. I felt half the room understand and the other half fear how much they understood. Vittorio laughed softly. "That's your great declaration, that you've grown sentimental over a baker with good timing." I turned to answer before sense could stop me. "My father was a pianist," I said. My voice did not shake. "He died because he went to the wound first, while men like you learn to let other people bleed. If you want to mock something tonight, start with your own courage." No one at the table had expected me to speak. That was useful. Vittorio's eyes fixed on me, and for a moment the polished mask slipped enough for me to see the appetite beneath it. "There you are," he murmured. Dante's hand left mine. I missed it instantly. Then he stood. So did everyone else. It was ridiculous, that choreography of fear. It should have made him look theatrical. It never did. It made the rest of them look borrowed. "From this moment," Dante said, "all Caruso roots are frozen. All accounts attached to Vittorio Caruso are seized pending review. Any man in this room who answers his calls before mine is choosing his funeral music in advance." He turned his head slightly. "Enzo." Enzo stepped behind Vittorio's chair. For the first time that night, genuine surprise crossed Vittorio's face. "You prepared this as a trial," he said. "No," Dante replied. "A courtesy." Vittorio pushed back from the table too suddenly for grace. You don't have enough to bury me. Dante's voice dropped to the register that made rooms obedient. Not yet. That chilled me more than if he had said yes. Vittorio's gaze moved from Dante to me, to the evidence on the table, then back again. He smiled then, small, cold, and promising nothing good. This isn't over, Dante almost smiled back. That, he said, is the first true thing you've said all evening. 2 men escorted Vittorio out, not like a prisoner and not like an equal. Something worse, something undecided. When the doors shut behind him, the room remained silent. Dante looked around the table once. If anyone here still confuses softness with weakness, he said, correct it privately. I'm tired of doing it for you. No one spoke. He turned to me then, not touching, not needing to. Come, I stood. As he led me out of the room, he did what he had never done before in front of them. His hands settled at the center of my back, not possessive. Protective enough to feel like possession anyway. Every eye in Belladonna followed us. No one laughed. Nico woke angry enough to heal. Bianca considered this promising. By the second morning after the council, he could sit up without swearing at God more than twice an hour, which in our family qualified as recovery. Dante had moved him into a guest room on the 3rd floor with windows overlooking the garden and 2 guards outside the door, not because Nico needed protection from the house, but because the house had become the safest address in Manhattan, and everybody knew it. I brought him tea just after dawn, and found him flipping through one of Dante's financial ledgers with deep suspicion. Why are you reading Mafia accounting? I wanted to see whether rich criminals use less boring columns. He looked up. They don't. I set the tray down. How's your shoulder? How's your talent for walking into traps? I sat on the edge of the bed. We're both doing poorly. He reached for the tea with his good hand, winced, and abandoned the attempt. I handed it to him. After a moment, he said, he stayed outside my door all night. I went very still. Who? Nico stared at me over the rim of the cup. Really? I looked away. There's a dent in his shoulder line from the wallpaper, Nico said. I assume that's romantic by prison standards. That is not a sentence anyone should ever say again. He smiled faintly, then sobered. Elena, the man at the dock, the one who called me. He said something before he handed the phone to Vittorio. What? Nico frowned, reaching back through painkillers and blood loss. He said, ask the Marini girl whether her father still hid things in the piano. I didn't understand it then. My head lifted sharply. The piano, I said. Nico nodded. Why? I stood too fast. Because if Vittorio knows about the music book, the council wasn't his endgame. It was a clock. Belladonna was closed by the time we got there. Rain had scrubbed the streets clean and left them shining black under the lamps. The front dining room was dark except for the low lights over the bar, but the private room in back glowed amber through the frosted glass. It looked indecently warm for a place holding that many ghosts. Dante had insisted on bringing 6 men. I had insisted on coming anyway. We compromised by arguing in the car until Tommaso threatened to drive us into the Hudson for silence. You're both impossible, he said, navigating a turn with offended elegance. One of you weaponizes restraint, the other disobeys like it's cardio. I don't make a habit of disobeying, I said. From beside me, Dante answered without looking up from the pistol he was checking. You literally do. Tommaso made a small, delighted sound. Relationship growth, Dante and I said together, Tommaso. He grinned into the windshield. Worth it. The plan, if it deserved that name, was simple. Vittorio knew about the music book because somebody had heard enough after the doc to make him dangerous. He would assume the full record, names, plates, dates, the proof of Paolo Marini's witness list, was still at Belladonna or copied somewhere inside it. Men like Vittorio trusted hiding places more than people. It made them predictable. So Enzo had leaked exactly one thing through exactly one frightened accountant. Dante planned to move old papers out of Belladonna tonight. We were betting Vittorio could not resist finishing what his family had begun on that floor. I hated the plan. Dante hated that I hated it and came anyway. When we entered through the kitchen, Maria was there in a black coat over her apron, arms crossed, looking like the patron saint of furious domestic judgment. "No one dies near my ovens," she said. Tommaso kissed the air beside her cheek. "You say the sweetest things when stressed." She shoved a rosary into his hand. "For courage." He looked at it, then at her. "I may marry you out of panic. Go." Dante gave final instructions in the pantry, where sacks of flour stood beside ammunition with surreal good breeding. Enzo took 2 men upstairs to the office overlooking the alley. Tommaso stayed in the service corridor with a radio and the expression of a man who understood he had once again lost an argument with fate. I was supposed to remain in the kitchen. That lasted 14 minutes. The old piano still stood in the corner of the front room near the bar, lid closed, bench tucked in. My father's instrument once, Belladonna's relic now. I could not stop looking at it through the dining room doors. Dante caught the direction of my gaze. "No," I folded my arms. "That's not fair. It was not designed to be. There could be more hidden there. There could be a bullet there. You really know how to seduce a woman." His eyes darkened in a way that had nothing to do with anger. "Not now." The words landed lower than they should have. I hated that my pulse still answered him in rooms where men planned murder. Then the front door opened. Every muscle in Dante's body changed. The restaurant had been dark from the street. The lock should have kept anyone out without a key. Yet footsteps crossed the tile with the confidence of a man who believed keys were for employees and lesser sins. Vittorio's voice floated in from the dining room. "You always did sentimental things in old rooms, cousin." Dante looked once at me. "Stay behind me." This time I nodded. He went through the doors first. I followed because obedience, in my case, apparently came with a limp. Vittorio stood near the piano in a charcoal coat with rain still beaded on the shoulders. 2 men flanked him. One held a gun low. The other already had the piano bench half pulled out. He smiled when he saw me behind Dante. "You do ruin surprises, Elena." Dante stopped in the center of the dining room. The old mirrors threw back 3 versions of him, 1 real, 2 ghosts. "I gave you the courtesy of a counsel," he said. "You answered with burglary." Vittorio's smile widened. "Is that what this is?" I thought it was family archaeology. His gaze dipped toward the piano bench. Something ugly and cold opened under my ribs. He knew. Dante heard it in my breathing before I said a word. "How much?" he asked without turning. My mouth felt dry. "Enough." Vittorio lifted one shoulder. "Your pianist father was more meticulous than I appreciated." I made that mistake once already. The room went silent around the sentence. Dante's voice lost all warmth. "Say it again." Vittorio looked almost amused. "Why, so she can hear it clearly." "Fine." He turned his head slightly toward me. Paolo Marini should have kept his hands to his keys. Instead, he wrote down names, plates, little moral observations. Very touching. "My father paid to recover the pages. Your father hid them better than expected." He glanced at the bench. "Families are so inconveniently sentimental." My nails bit my palms. "You killed him," I said. Vittorio met my gaze. No mask now, no charm, just appetite with a tailored haircut. "My father gave the order," he said. I approved the correction years later when I realized loose ends can reproduce. The world narrowed to one red, perfect point. Dante took 1 step forward. Vittorio raised his gun. At the exact same moment, the dining room lights blazed to full brightness. The upstairs office door slammed open. Enzo's men appeared on the balcony landing with weapons trained. From the service corridor, Tommaso emerged holding his own gun with visible resentment, as if violence had once again interrupted a perfectly valid career in complaints. Vittorio's two men swung toward the new movement. Dante did not. He kept his eyes on his cousin. "I was hoping," Dante said quietly, "you'd be vain enough to say it yourself." Understanding hit Vittorio half a second too late. A recorder sat on the bar beneath one of the lamps, its red light steadily on. Vittorio's expression turned murderous. Then everything broke. His left-hand man fired first. Enzo's shot took him high in the shoulder before the second round left the gun. Tommaso dove behind the host stand with language inventive enough to blister varnish. The other man near the piano made for me, probably because everyone stupid eventually made for me. I grabbed the first thing my hand found, a silver dessert fork. It was a terrible weapon. It was also what I had. He seized my arm. I drove the fork into the back of his hand hard enough to make him howl and lose the gun. The weapon skidded under a table, chairs overturned. A wineglass burst somewhere near my ear. Dante reached us before the man had finished cursing. He struck once, clean, efficient, final. The man hit the floor and stayed there. Then Dante turned back toward Vittorio. Their guns were both up now. The distance between them was barely 6 feet, close enough to make every heartbeat matter. Vittorio's smile came back crooked and furious. "You'd stage a confession in your sister's graveyard of a restaurant." "No," Dante said. "In the room where my family learned what hesitation costs." The sound that escaped Vittorio was almost a laugh. "And what did you learn, exactly?" Dante's answer was so soft I nearly missed it. "That I won't make the same mistake twice." Vittorio fired. I saw the movement before the sound. "Down," Dante shouted. This time I obeyed before fear could argue. The bullet shattered the mirror behind where my head had been. Dante's shot answered almost inside the same breath and took Vittorio through the thigh. He crashed into the piano bench, striking the keys with a horrible bright discord as he fell. For 1 second no one moved. Then Vittorio, bleeding and breathless, tried to raise the gun again from the floor. Dante crossed the room, kicked the weapon away, and seized him by the front of his coat. I had seen Dante angry. I had seen him violent. I had not seen this. This was grief-given hands. He dragged Vittorio across the tile toward the private room, toward the exact patch of floor where Giulia had died, and my father had tried to keep death from taking everything at once. Vittorio's injured leg painted a dark streak behind him. "Dante," Enzo warned, not because he wanted him stopped, because he wanted witnesses arranged properly. Dante shoved Vittorio into a chair at the head of the table where he had once sat smiling under chandeliers and insulted waitresses. The symmetry of it turned my stomach. Vittorio was pale now, breathing too fast, blood soaking through expensive wool. "If you kill me here, every root I have burns with me." "Then burn." He said it so flatly the whole room seemed to recoil, but he didn't shoot. That was the point, he didn't shoot. Instead, Dante set his gun on the table, deliberately, in front of everyone. Then he leaned in close enough that only some of us heard him. "You are going to sign every account, every warehouse, every cop, every judge, every dockworker your father bought and you inherited," he said. "You are going to do it breathing. You are going to do it knowing the girl you called disposable will be the reason your name survives only on paper and in disgrace." Vittorio's face twisted. "Over her," Dante straightened slowly. And then he did the thing that changed the room forever. He looked at me, not around me, not past me, at me. "Come here, Alina." The old instinct to refuse rose and died all in the same second. I crossed the private room on unsteady legs and stopped beside him. Vittorio laughed through blood. "You make a queen out of a waitress." Dante's hand came to the small of my back, warm, certain. "Impossible to mistake." "No," he said. "I stand beside the woman every man in this room underestimated while she kept outrunning their cowardice." No one breathed. His gaze stayed on Vittorio, but the words went wider than that. To Bruno, to Enzo, to Tommaso, to the men in the doorway, to Belladonna itself. To be clear, Dante said, voice quiet enough to make obedience feel inevitable. Any disrespect shown to Elena Marini is disrespect shown to me. Any threat aimed at her is aimed at my house. If any man here is confused, let him speak now and lose the habit permanently. Silence. Tommaso from the doorway murmured to Maria, I'd like it noted I was never confused. Maria dabbed at her eyes angrily. Shut up. Vittorio looked from Dante's hand at my back to my face and understood at last that this was not leverage anymore. It was allegiance, worse in his world. You're finished, he whispered. Dante's mouth curved without kindness. No, you are, he nodded once to Enzo. Enzo stepped forward with papers already prepared. Of course he had papers. Even vengeance in Dante's world arrived itemized. While Vittorio bled and cursed and signed again, I stood where Dante had placed me and felt the room reassemble around a truth I had never asked for but no longer had the strength to deny. This was not temporary, not the danger, not the grief, not the man beside me. When it was done, Enzo hauled Vittorio to his feet and took him out through the service hall, where law, corruption, or some private combination of both waited to finish what was left of him. The restaurant fell quiet. Broken glass glittered on the floor. One of the old mirrors hung cracked like a split halo. The piano bench sat crooked. Somewhere in the kitchen, a pot simmered on as if sauce respected no climax except its own. I looked down at my hand and realized I was still clutching the bent dessert fork. Tommaso noticed first. I am begging you to frame that. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. The sound was shaky and wrong and real. Slowly the others withdrew, Enzo to the alley. Bianca to check the wounded man who had not made the wise choice quickly enough. Maria to light a candle near the kitchen saint and curse all criminal bloodlines in one breath. At last there was only Dante and me in the private room, and the floor, the same floor where Giulia died, where Paolo Marini had crossed broken glass, where Matteo had bled, where my life had turned because I knelt instead of ran. Dante looked at it once, then at me. I should have kept you out of this room, he said. I glanced around at the shattered crystal, the blood, the half-cleared plates from a dinner nobody had finished. That seems late. A rough ghost of a smile touched his mouth and vanished. You disobey too much. You order too much. Yes, yes. The echo of it sat between us, strange, tender, almost absurd. Then his gaze dropped to the fork still in my hand. Show me, I frowned. What? Your hand? I opened my fingers. Somewhere in the fight I had cut my palm on broken tines or glass. The line was shallow but bright enough to catch his attention. His face changed at once. Not rage, something more intimate and therefore more dangerous. He took the fork from me, set it aside, and reached for my hand with a care that nearly undid me. His thumb brushed the cut. Once. You're hurt. It barely counts. It counts. The room went quiet in a different way. He lifted my hand and pressed a kiss to the center of my palm, not my mouth. Not some feverish claim built for witnesses, just that. The most devastating thing he had done all night. My breath caught. Dante. His eyes came up to mine. What happens now? I asked. The answer took its time coming, as if he were testing it for the first time by saying it aloud. Now, he said, you stop looking for doors. The air thinned. He stepped closer. So close I could smell cedar, clean soap, and the faint metallic trace of a night that had nearly gone worse. I'm tired of pretending you are a problem to move, he said quietly. You are the woman my dead remember, the woman my enemies fear because they keep failing to make you small. The woman I can't seem to leave in any room without my whole body tracking the walls. I looked at his mouth because there are limits to human composure. That is the worst speech I've ever liked. This time the smile stayed a second longer. Quiet one. Don't call me that unless you're going to do something about it. His breath changed. That was all the warning I got. He kissed me in the private room at Belladonna with one hand still around mine and the other at the back of my neck. Not gentle because the night had no room left for pretending. Not rough because even now restraint was the language he trusted most. The kiss was grief and fury and promise, and the exact shape of a choice finally made in the open. When he lifted his head, his forehead rested briefly against mine. Outside, the city kept moving. Inside, on a restaurant floor that had taken too much from both of us, something at last had been returned.